Jay pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders as the afternoon rain picked up. The other kids had rushed home after school, eager to escape the downpour, but Jay never minded the rain. At 12 years old, he found something peaceful about the patter of droplets against the colony's transparent dome overhead. New Terra Colony might be humanity's newest outpost among the stars, but rain still felt like home. He cut through the market district, taking his usual shortcut between the sleek buildings. The architecture was a strange mix of human practicality and Doran elegance, all sharp angles and shimmering surfaces that never quite seemed to get wet, no matter how hard it rained. That's when he spotted her. In the narrow space between two buildings barely sheltered from the rain sat an old woman. She huddled against the wall, her clothes little more than rags, her gray hair plastered to her weathered face. Something about her seemed different from the other colony residents. Maybe the way she kept her eyes downcast, or how her shoulders curled inward as if trying to disappear. Jay slowed his steps. He'd never seen her before, which was strange in itself. New Terra wasn't that big, and everyone pretty much knew everyone else. The colony administrators kept tight control over who came and went. "Are you okay?" he called out, stepping closer. The woman looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. For a moment, Jay felt something strange, like a current of electricity running up his spine. Then it passed, and she was just an old woman again, shivering in the rain. "I'm fine, child," she said, her voice surprisingly clear. "Just resting these old bones." Jay glanced around. The street was mostly empty, but he spotted a group of Dorans watching from the doorway of a nearby building. Their tall, willowy frames and metallic skin made them stand out anywhere they went. The aliens had been on New Terra for nearly a decade, now, allegedly to help humanity establish itself among the stars, but Jay had always found them cold and calculating. One of the Dorans, wearing the distinctive sash of a diplomat, narrowed his silvery eyes at the scene. Even from this distance, Jay could feel their judgment. "You shouldn't be sitting in the rain," Jay said, turning back to the woman. "You'll catch cold." The woman smiled faintly. "Perhaps. But there are worse things than being cold and wet." Jay hesitated only a second before shrugging off his school jacket. It wasn't much, just synthetic fabric with the New Terra school emblem, but it was dry and warm. "Here," he said, draping it around her shoulders. "This will help a little." The woman looked genuinely surprised. "You would give me your coat? But then you'll be wet." Jay shrugged. "I'm almost home anyway, and I've got others." That wasn't entirely true. The colony's resource allocation meant each student got exactly 2 school jackets per year, and he'd just given away one of his. His mom wouldn't be happy, but something told him this was more important. "I've got some food too if you're hungry," he added, already digging into his backpack. He pulled out his lunch container, still half full with the rice and vegetables. He hadn't finished at school. "It's not much, but it's still warm." From the doorway, he heard one of the Dorans speaking, their melodic language translating through the colony's ambient system. "Ambassador Tay, observe this display of inefficiency. The human child gives away resources he himself needs." The taller Doran, Ambassador Tay apparently, nodded. "Wasteful emotional responses. This is precisely why humanity remains centuries behind true civilization. They cannot separate logic from sentiment." Jay pretended not to hear as he handed the food container to the woman. The Dorans had never bothered to understand that humans could hear their translated conversations. "What's your name?" he asked, as the woman accepted the food with trembling hands. "You can call me Minji," she said after a moment's hesitation. "I'm Jay. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? The community center might have space." Minji smiled as she took a small bite of the food. "Don't worry about me, young Jay. I've survived much worse than a little rain." There was something in her eyes when she said this, a depth that made Jay think she was telling the absolute truth. "Maybe I could bring you something tomorrow," he suggested. "More food or a blanket?" "You would do that for a stranger?" Minji asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Sure. Why not?" Jay answered simply. Ambassador Tay's voice carried again from across the street. Note this in the evaluation report. Even their young demonstrate the weakness that has limited human development. This emotional handicap may be too deeply ingrained for remediation. Jay felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment and a touch of anger, but he pushed those feelings aside. The Dorans could think whatever they wanted. "I'll come back tomorrow after school," he promised Minji. "Try to stay dry, okay?" As he turned to leave, rain soaking through his thin shirt, he caught a final glimpse of Minji. For just a second, so briefly he thought he might have imagined it, a faint light seemed to glow beneath her skin like sunshine through clouds. Then she was just an old woman again, huddled in an alley with his jacket draped over her shoulders. Unknown to Jay, as he hurried home through the rain, both Minji and Ambassador Tai watched him go, each with very different thoughts about what they had just witnessed. True to his word, Jay returned the next day, and the day after that. And soon, visiting Minji became part of his daily routine. He'd slip away after school, sometimes with an extra bread roll he'd saved from lunch, other times with a worn blanket or a book he thought she might enjoy. Minji was always in the same alley, as if waiting specifically for him. Their conversations started simple: weather, colony news, what he'd learned in school that day, but grew deeper as the weeks passed. "Why do you live out here?" Jay asked one afternoon, sitting cross-legged beside her. He'd brought his history textbook and was showing her pictures of old Earth. Minji smiled that mysterious smile of hers. "Some of us belong nowhere and everywhere at once," she said, tracing her finger over an image of ancient mountains. "Tell me more about these places." Their friendship was simple and easy. Jay liked how Minji actually listened when he talked, unlike his teachers who were always rushing to the next lesson, or his parents who were too busy with colony work. What Jay didn't know was that word of his daily visits had spread far beyond the alley. "Look, there he goes. The beggar's pet," whispered Hana, one of the Doran children allowed to attend the colony school. Her skin had the same metallic sheen as all Dorans, but with the bluish tint that marked the younger generation. Jay kept his eyes forward as he passed the group of Doran students clustered near the school exit. He'd gotten used to their comments over the past few weeks, but that didn't make them any easier to hear. "I heard Ambassador Tay has been recording his visits," said another Doran youth named Quan. "Says it's the perfect example of why humans will never be ready for full integration." "Hey, charity case," Hana called out louder. "Why not bring your stinking friend to school, or are you ashamed of her?" Jay clutched his backpack straps tighter but didn't respond. Getting into arguments with the Doran kids never ended well. Their parents held too much power in the colony. What he didn't notice was the small drone hovering above, recording his every move as he made his way through the colony streets. Inside the sleek Doran diplomatic compound across town, Ambassador Tay stood before a semicircle of his colleagues, gesturing at a floating holographic display showing Jay's path. "This specimen has continued his wasteful resource allocation for 16 consecutive days," Tay explained, his long fingers dancing through the air to manipulate the display. "Note how he diverts food from his own nutritional requirements to sustain the vagrant." The assembled Dorans murmured their disapproval, their metallic skin reflecting the blue light of the hologram. "Most curious," said Council Member Yoon, her silver eyes narrowing. "Have we identified the vagrant? She is not in our colony registry." Tay hesitated. "Our scans have been inconsistent, but this is irrelevant. The point of my presentation is to demonstrate the fundamental flaw in human decision-making. The boy gains nothing from this relationship yet persists against all logic. Perhaps there is some benefit we cannot perceive," suggested a younger diplomat, earning sharp looks from the others. "The only benefit," Tay replied coldly, "is emotional satisfaction, a primitive evolutionary holdover that humans have failed to outgrow. This is precisely why the Galactic Council must delay their admission for at least another century." Back in the colony streets, Jay hurried along with his small package of food. He'd started taking odd jobs around the neighborhood, sweeping storefronts, helping sort recycling, to earn extra credits for supplies. Today he'd managed to buy a small container of real fruit, an expensive luxury on a colony world. When he reached the alley, Minji was waiting, but something was different. She seemed more alert, her eyes clearer as they followed his approach. "You're late today," she said with a hint of amusement. "Sorry," Jay huffed, catching his breath. "I had to finish my work at Mr. Hand's shop, but look what I got." He proudly held out the container of sliced apples and berries. Minji's eyes widened slightly. "Real fruit? How did you manage that?" "Saved up," Jay said with a shrug, sitting beside her on the crate he'd salvaged last week. "Thought you might like something special." As Minji took a small bite of apple, her expression turned serious. "Why do you keep coming here, Jay? Your friends mock you for it, I've seen them." Jay looked down, suddenly finding the pattern of pebbles by his feet fascinating. "They're not really my friends." "That doesn't answer my question." He struggled to find the right words. "I guess because it feels right. My grandma used to say that being kind isn't something you do for thanks. It's just something you do because that's who you want to be." Something flashed in Minji's eyes, a literal flash, like a tiny bolt of lightning. Jay blinked and it was gone. "Your grandmother sounds wise," Minji said softly. "She was." Jay nodded. "She came on the first colony ship. Used to tell me that what makes humans special isn't our technology or how smart we are. It's that we look out for each other." Neither of them noticed the small group of Doran officials watching from the main street, their silver eyes reflecting the fading daylight. That evening, as Jay walked home, the harassment took a new turn. A holographic projection suddenly appeared on the colony wall beside him, a perfect recording of him sharing his lunch with Minji earlier that week. "The human child demonstrates pathological altruism," boomed Ambassador Tay's voice over the colony's public address system. "Observe for your educational benefit." Jay froze in horror as colonists stopped to watch. The recording showed him from multiple angles, his actions narrated like some nature documentary. His face burned with embarrassment as passing adults glanced between him and the projection. "This is what the Dorans think is important educational content," muttered an older colonist, shaking his head as he continued walking. Others weren't so kind. Jay could hear the whispers. "That's the beggar boy, and his poor parents, and why doesn't colony security do something about that old woman?" The recording continued to play as Jay finally broke into a run, tears streaming down his face. He didn't stop until he reached his family's small apartment, slamming the door behind him. "Jay, what's wrong?" his mother called from the kitchen. He wiped his eyes quickly. "Nothing, just tired from school." That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Jay made a decision. No matter what the Dorans did, no matter how much they mocked him or tried to make an example of him, he wouldn't stop visiting Minji. Something told him she was important, more important than the Dorans could possibly understand. What he couldn't know was just how right he was. The first sign that something was wrong came during breakfast. Jay could barely lift his spoon to his mouth. His head felt like it was stuffed with cotton, and his skin burned hot, then cold in waves. "You're not going anywhere today," his mother said firmly, pressing her hand against his forehead. "That's colony fever for sure." Jay tried to protest, but even speaking took too much energy. Colony fever wasn't dangerous. Everyone got it eventually, while their bodies adjusted to New Terra's engineered ecosystem. But it knocked you flat for at least 3 days. "But I need to," he mumbled. "You need to rest," his mother interrupted, already calling her supervisor to request a home care day. Colony rules required a parent to stay with any sick child under 14. All day, Jay drifted in and out of consciousness, his fever dreams filled with strange images, stars moving in patterns, whispered conversations in languages he'd never heard. Whenever he woke, his first thought was of Minji waiting in that alley, wondering where he was. "I should have told her I wouldn't make it," he said weakly as his mother replaced the cool cloth on his forehead. "Told who, sweetheart?" She asked distractedly, checking his temperature. Jay hesitated. He'd never mentioned Minji to his parents. They worked so hard, worried so much about making ends meet on their colony stipends. They wouldn't understand why he gave away food and supplies they could barely afford. "No one," he mumbled, turning, his face toward the wall. That night, his fever peaked. His mother finally fell asleep in the chair beside his bed after staying up for hours monitoring his temperature. The room was dark except for the faint glow of medical readouts on his bedside console. Through his fever haze, Jay thought he heard a tapping at his window. Impossible. They lived on the 4th floor. The tapping came again, more insistent. With tremendous effort, Jay turned his head. His eyes widened. Minji was there, somehow floating outside his window 4 stories up, her face pressed against the glass. For a moment, Jay was sure he was hallucinating. He blinked hard, but she remained, gesturing for him to open the window. Moving like a sleepwalker, Jay pushed himself up and staggered across the room. The window slid open silently. "How did you—" he began, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Shh," Minji said gently. "You're very ill. How did you find me? How are you even up here?" Jay's head spun with questions and fever. Minji didn't answer. Instead, she reached through the window and placed her weathered hand on his forehead. Her touch felt like cool water flowing through him, washing away the fever's fire. Jay gasped as clarity rushed back into his mind. "What did you just do?" he asked, suddenly aware that he felt completely well. Minji smiled, that mysterious smile, a small kindness for a kind boy. Before Jay could ask anything else, she withdrew her hand and seemed to fade into the darkness. He rushed back to the window, but she was gone. No sign of how she'd reached his window or where she'd disappeared. "Jay, why is the window open?" His mother stirred in her chair. "Sorry, I was hot," he said automatically, closing it. He climbed back into bed, mind racing. His fever was completely gone. That wasn't possible. Colony fever never broke so suddenly. The next morning, his mother was astonished by his recovery. "I've never seen anyone bounce back from colony fever so quickly," she said, checking his temperature for the 3rd time. "Are you sure you feel okay?" "Never better," Jay replied. And it was true. He felt more energetic than he had in weeks. His mother reluctantly agreed to let him return to school, though she insisted on walking him there personally, still worried about his miraculous recovery. As they passed through the central plaza, they noticed an unusual amount of Doran security personnel. The tall aliens moved with purpose, setting up what looked like sensor equipment around the colony. "Wonder what that's about," his mother murmured. Jay had a strange feeling it might have something to do with Minji. At school, he overheard snippets of conversation among the Doran teaching assistants. "Massive energy spike last night. Ambassador, Tay has ordered full spectrum analysis. Nothing like it since the crystalline event 50 years ago." After school, Jay raced to Minji's alley, part of him afraid she wouldn't be there. But there she was, sitting in her usual spot, looking exactly the same as always. Except, not exactly the same. Now that Jay was paying closer attention, he noticed things he'd somehow missed before. Occasionally, when she moved a certain way, light seemed to bend around her. Sometimes her eyes reflected colors that weren't present in their surroundings. And when she spoke about distant places, it sounded less like she was recalling stories and more like she was sharing memories. "You're not really a homeless woman, are you?" Jay asked quietly, sitting beside her. Minji looked at him with those unfathomable eyes. "What makes you say that?" "Last night. At my window. You healed me." She studied him for a long moment. "And if I'm not what I appear to be, would that change how you treat me?" Jay thought about it. "No, you're still my friend." "That," she said with a gentle smile, "is why you continue to pass the tests." Before Jay could ask what she meant, a small creature, something like a cross between a bird and a lizard, fell from the colony roof, landing with a soft thud on the ground before them. Its wing was clearly broken, the tiny creature chirping in pain. Without hesitation, Jay reached for it, cradling the injured animal in his palms. "Poor thing. We should take it to the biological station. They might be able to help." "Or perhaps we could help it now," Minji suggested. She reached out one finger and gently touched the creature's damaged wing. Jay gasped as soft light pulsed from her fingertip, flowing like liquid sunshine into the small animal. Before his eyes, the wing straightened, bones realigning and healing in seconds. The creature chirped once in surprise, then fluttered up and away. How? Jay began, but the question died on his lips as he looked up and saw 4 Doran security officers at the end of the alley, their sensor devices pointed directly at them. Energy signature confirmed, one said into a communication device. Notify Ambassador Tay immediately. Minji didn't seem concerned. She simply took Jay's hand in hers, her skin warm against his. Jay, she said softly, you have passed the first test with remarkable compassion. But there are more trials ahead, for you, and for all humanity. What are you talking about? What tests? Jay asked, aware that the Dorans were approaching slowly, their silver eyes fixed on Minji. Soon you'll understand, she promised. Remember this moment when the truth is revealed. And then somehow, though the Dorans were blocking the only exit from the alley, Minji was gone. Not running away or hiding, but simply gone, as if she'd stepped through an invisible door. The Dorans rushed forward, their sensors beeping. Wildly, but found only Jay, sitting alone and confused. Ambassador Tay arrived minutes later, his tall frame looming over Jay. Where is she? He demanded, his melodic voice turned harsh. Where is the energy source? Jay looked up at the ambassador, suddenly unafraid. I don't know what you're talking about. I was just helping an old woman. Isn't that what your reports say I do? Something flickered across Tay's metallic features. Uncertainty, perhaps even fear. This is no longer about your primitive emotional responses, human child, he said quietly. This is about something much, much more significant. Jay didn't understand what was happening, but one thing was becoming clear. Minji was far more than she appeared to be, and somehow he had become part of something much bigger than simple acts of kindness to a beggar woman. The grand evaluation hall gleamed under artificial starlight, its vaulted ceiling programmed to display the most important systems of the galaxy. Jay had never been inside this building before. Few humans had. It was the pride of the Doran diplomatic compound, a place where decisions about planetary futures were made. Today, those decisions were about Earth. Jay sat uncomfortably in the front row beside his parents, who kept glancing at him with a mixture of concern and confusion. They still didn't understand why their son had been summoned to this prestigious event, along with colony leaders and Earth representatives who had traveled all the way from the home planet. Why exactly are we here? His father whispered. Jay shook his head slightly. I'm not sure. That wasn't entirely true. In the 3 days since his encounter with Minji and the Doran security forces, Jay had pieced together enough to know something big was happening. The colony had been buzzing, with rumors about energy anomalies and strange readings. Doran ships had arrived in orbit, more than anyone had seen before, and now this ceremony, hastily arranged according to the whispers around him, where Ambassador Tay would deliver Earth's formal evaluation to the Galactic Council representatives. Decay. Lights dimmed and a hush fell over the crowd as Ambassador Tay glided to the center of the circular stage. His metallic skin seemed to absorb and reflect the starlight from above, making him look like a living constellation. Esteemed council members, distinguished guests, representatives of Earth, Tay began, his melodic voice carrying easily through the hall. For 10 of your years we have observed humanity's progress on New Terra Colony. Today I present our findings and recommendations. The audience shifted nervously. Everyone knew how much rode on this evaluation. A positive review would mean advanced technology transfers, trade agreements, and Earth's first steps toward joining the galactic community as equals. A negative one could set humanity back decades. Ambassador Tay gestured elegantly and holographic. Displays appeared around the hall, showing scenes from colony life. Jay recognized many of them. The school, the markets, community gatherings. Humans have demonstrated admirable technological adaptation, Tay continued. Their intelligence is not in question. However, intelligence alone does not qualify a species for advanced integration. The display shifted and suddenly Jay saw himself on the giant projections, giving his coat to Minji, sharing food, reading to her. His stomach clenched as his private acts of kindness were put on display for hundreds of people. This human child, Tay said, pointing directly at Jay, exemplifies the fundamental flaw in Earth's development path: emotional decision-making overriding, logical resource management, sentimentality trumping efficiency. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jay's mother gripped his hand tightly. The boy repeatedly sacrifices his own resources to assist a non-productive individual, gaining nothing in return. This irrational compassion, is that what you call kindness? Irrational? A voice interrupted from the back of the hall. The crowd gasped and turned. Walking slowly down the center aisle was Minji, still in her tattered clothes, still hunched over as if bearing an invisible weight. Doran's security officers moved to intercept her, drawing their sleek energy batons. "This is a closed proceeding," one announced. "You must leave immediately." Minji continued walking, ignoring them completely. When the first officer touched her shoulder, his baton sparked and went dead. He stepped back in confusion. "Remove this vagrant," Ambassador Tay ordered, his composure slipping for the first time. Two more officers approached, raising their weapons. Both devices sputtered and died before they could be activated. Minji never broke stride, making her way steadily toward the stage. "I believe," she said, her voice suddenly clear and powerful in a way that made Jay's spine tingle, "that you were discussing my young friend's compassion." The hall fell silent. Ambassador Tay's metallic features contorted with something like recognition and fear. "It cannot be," he whispered, the words somehow carrying through the hall. Minji reached the foot of the stage and looked up at the ambassador. "It has been a long time since your kind failed your own test, Ambassador Tay. 300 years, I believe. Your ancestors showed the same disdain for irrational compassion when they passed a dying Kultha refugee ship without stopping to render aid." Tay's silver eyes widened. "How could you possibly know of that incident? The records were sealed by the elders." "Yes." Minji straightened, and as she did, a transformation began. The tattered clothes dissolved like morning mist, replaced by flowing garments that seemed woven from light itself. Her hunched form straightened, revealing a tall, elegant being. Her weathered skin smoothed, taking on a subtle luminescence that made the Doran's metallic sheen look dull by comparison. Her gray hair flowed out around her like a living halo, stars seeming to spark and dance within its strands. The crowd gasped as one. Several people fell to their knees. Even the Earth representatives, hardened diplomats who prided themselves on maintaining composure, stared in open-mouthed shock. Jay couldn't believe his eyes. The beggar woman he'd been helping for weeks had transformed into something magnificent. Not human, not Doran, but something far beyond either. "I am Minji of the Elder Council," she announced, her voice resonating through the hall like crystal bells. "For those unfamiliar with galactic history, we are the founders of the interstellar community, the architects of the laws that govern cosmic cooperation." A Doran council member had fallen to his knees. "The elders were believed extinct for 3,000 years, he stammered. "Not extinct," Minji corrected gently, "merely watching, waiting, testing." She turned to face the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the humans and Dorans alike before settling on Jay. Her smile was the same one he remembered from their conversations in the alley, kind, with a hint of mischief. "Young Jay did not know my identity when he offered me his coat in the rain. He did not seek advantage when he shared his food. He expected nothing in return for his kindness." She looked pointedly at Ambassador Tay. He demonstrated the quality that truly indicates a species' readiness for greater galactic responsibility. "Compassion," whispered someone in the crowd. "Indeed," Minji nodded. "The Dorans once possessed this quality in abundance, before they engineered it out of themselves in pursuit of efficiency. They deemed emotions, love, empathy, compassion, as evolutionary weaknesses to be eliminated." Ambassador Tay had recovered some of his composure. "We evolved beyond such primitive. You diminished yourselves." Minji cut him off, her voice still gentle but carrying an authority that silenced him instantly. "And in doing so, you failed the test we set for all developing species." She gestured. and the holographic displays changed to show scenes from across the galaxy. Dozens of species interacting with disguised elders, some offering help, others turning away. Every species that reaches for the stars must be tested, Minji explained. Not for their technology or their intelligence, but for their hearts, for their capacity to care for others without expectation of reward. She turned back to Jay and extended her hand. Hesitantly, he stood and walked to the stage, taking her luminous fingers in his. "This child," Minji said, "has shown us that humanity, for all its flaws and struggles, has not lost what matters most. And that is why today marks a new chapter in Earth's relationship with the galaxy." Ambassador Tay looked as if he might protest, but another Doran, older with deeper silver eyes, placed a restraining hand on his arm. "If an elder has spoken," the older Doran said quietly, "then the evaluation is complete." Minji smiled at Jay, and in her eyes he could see the same person who had sat with him in that alley day after day, listening to his stories and sharing her wisdom. "You never needed to be tested at all," he realized aloud. "No," she agreed. "I could have identified myself at any time. But then we would not have learned what you would do when you thought no one was watching." The implications of her words, and her presence, began to ripple through the hall as humans and Dorans alike realized that everything had just changed. The morning after the revelation in the Grand Evaluation Hall, New Terra Colony woke to a changed world. Overnight, the news had spread through every communication channel across Earth and its colonies. The elders were real. They had been among humans all along, and humanity had passed their test. Jay sat on the rooftop of his apartment building, legs dangling over the edge as he watched ships coming and going with unprecedented frequency. Some were Doran vessels, instantly recognizable by their crystalline structures. Others were unfamiliar, elegant craft belonging to species humans had never encountered before, arriving now that Earth had earned a new status in galactic affairs. "There you are," came a familiar voice behind him. Jay turned to see Minji approaching, still in her elder form, luminous and tall, though she'd adapted her appearance to seem slightly more human than the night before. Less intimidating, but no less amazing. "I've been looking for you," she said, settling beside him with fluid grace. "That's a switch," Jay smiled. "Usually I was the one looking for you." Minji laughed, the sound like chimes in a gentle breeze. True enough, for a while they just sat in comfortable silence watching the activity below. Humans and Dorans moved through the streets, their interactions noticeably different now, less separated, more equal. "Ambassador Tay left this morning," Jay eventually said. "I saw his ship depart." Minji nodded. "He has been reassigned." The Doran High Council was not pleased to learn they had been sending one of their more prejudiced diplomats to evaluate Earth. "Did you get him in trouble on purpose?" Jay asked, curious rather than accusatory. "The ambassador created his own difficulties by allowing his biases to cloud his judgment," Minji replied. "But no, causing trouble was never my intention. My purpose was simply to observe, to test." Jay kicked his feet in the open air thinking, "But why me? I'm nobody special." "That's precisely why," Minji said gently. "True character is revealed in how we treat those from whom we expect nothing in return. And you were not the only one tested, Jay. Across Earth and all its colonies, my kind has been watching, evaluating. There. Are more of you? More elders disguised as beggars?" Minji's eyes twinkled with that familiar mischief. "Some as beggars, yes. Others as street performers, forgotten elders in care facilities, refugees, or simply strangers in need of assistance. We take many forms when we test emerging species." The idea that powerful beings had been scattered throughout human civilization, watching and testing, should have been unsettling. Instead, Jay found it strangely comforting, like finding out the universe held more wonder than anyone had imagined. "And we passed? All of us?" "Not all individuals," Minji clarified. "No species is perfect, but as a whole, humanity demonstrated sufficient compassion to warrant advancement." Below them, a crowd had gathered in the colony's central plaza. A delegation of beings Jay had never seen before, tall, willowy creatures with opalescent skin, were presenting something to the colony governor. Even from this distance, Jay could see the reverence with which the objects were handled. Technology transfers have already begun, Minji explained, following his gaze. Nothing that will upset your developmental balance. We learned that lesson with the Vex Imperium, but enough to help humanity thrive. Jay thought about the implications. The Dorans could have helped us more all this time, couldn't they? They held back. Yes, Minji acknowledged. After their own failure centuries ago, the Dorans were assigned as observers rather than true partners to emerging species. They were permitted to trade only limited technologies, never their most advanced capabilities. Were they being punished? Minji considered this. Protected, perhaps, as much as punished. A species that loses touch with compassion risks destroying itself when given too much power. The Dorans needed time to rediscover what they had engineered away. As if on cue, a young Doran girl, Hana, who had mocked Jay so relentlessly at school, approached across the rooftop. She looked nervous, her silvery skin shifting in patterns that Jay had learned indicated emotional distress. "Excuse me," she said, her eyes fixed on the ground. "I wish to apologize." The word seemed difficult for her to pronounce. "My behavior toward you was incorrect." Jay glanced at Minji, who merely raised an eyebrow, leaving this to him. "It's okay," he said, after a moment. "You didn't understand." "No, I did not." Hana finally looked up. "But I wish to learn. My parents have enrolled me in the new cultural exchange program. I will be the first Doran youth to live with a human family for a full cycle." She hesitated. "Your mother offered to host me." Jay's surprise must have shown on his face because Hana quickly added, "I can request another family if—" "No, that's good," Jay said, finding he actually meant it. "We have a spare room since my sister left for university. Maybe we can both learn something." Hana's metallic features shifted into what Jay recognized as a tentative smile, before she bowed respectfully to Minji and departed. "That can't be easy for her," Jay observed. "Dorans pride themselves on never admitting error. Growth rarely comes without discomfort," Minji said. "But it seems the revelation is already changing perspectives, and not just among humans." They fell quiet again, watching the colony transform before their eyes. New construction had begun. At the outskirts, buildings with designs unlike anything on New Terra before. Ships continued to arrive, bringing delegations from worlds Jay had never heard of. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "Now," Minji said, "I become Earth's first non-human ambassador to the Galactic Council." Jay turned to her in surprise. "You're staying?" "For a time. Earth will need guidance as it joins the wider community. And I," she smiled warmly, "have grown rather fond of this world and its people." "Will I still see you? Or will you be too busy with important space diplomacy?" There was a hint of the old Jay in that question, the boy who had simply enjoyed the company of an old woman in an alley. "I was thinking," Minji said casually, "that I might need an advisor. Someone who understands human kindness better than most. The position would require missing some school, traveling to other colonies, possibly even Earth itself." Jay's eyes widened. "Me? But I don't know anything about diplomacy." "Perhaps not. But you understand something far more important. You understand that kindness isn't a weakness, it's the most advanced technology of all." She stood, offering her hand. "So, young Jay, will you help me teach this lesson to the stars?" Jay looked at her outstretched hand, then at the colony below. His small world that had suddenly become part of something vastly larger. In the plaza, humans and aliens alike were mingling, first tentative steps toward a new kind of community. All because he'd stopped to help someone who seemed to need it. "Yeah," he said, taking her hand and standing. "I think I'd like that." As they walked toward the stairwell, Minji casually asked, "Have you ever wanted to see a star being born? There's one forming just 12 light years from here. We could be there by dinner tomorrow." Jay laughed, a sound of pure joy and wonder. Are you serious? Completely serious, Minji assured him. Consider it your first diplomatic mission, witnessing the birth of new light in the darkness. After all, isn't that what kindness does? Below them, New Terra Colony continued its transformation. Not just a remote human outpost anymore, but a shining example of what compassion could achieve in a vast and waiting universe. And somewhere in the streets, another elder in disguise was watching another human child, waiting to see what choice they would make when offered the chance to be kind without reward.